Davidson, which we know, and Innes Walker, who wrote that letter, who is now a chief inspector, have also served to pervert the course of justice in this case. So it's a very bad thing, and lots of people are going to go down when it finally comes to light. I'm determined that it will come to light in due course by one means or another. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And I think when the BBC said this is a story that will go around the world, the worst they had ever heard, I don't think they were too far wrong, although there are some really horrific stories about that I've heard about as well, which compare with it in many, many ways, but it is horrifying. Now, there's another side to this story as well, and a very sinister side to the story, but I will go back in time on this. I'm going to go back to 1997. Now, Anne Greig, when she was 11 years old, her father died, and her elder brother, who was 6 years older, called Robert, who was known as Roy in the family, was a very good young man, a very honourable young man, and he decided he would take the responsibility of looking after his younger sister and his widowed mother. And so that was the case, so he looked after them as best he could. When Anne had children, Roy was also a wonderful uncle to the two children, to Greg, and especially to Hollie, because of her problem with having Down syndrome. And he worked very hard, he was devoted to her, he gave lots of time to her, he used to work very hard for charities to raise funds for Down syndrome victims, and he was just marvellous in that way. He never married, he was a bachelor, but he was a bar manager, he was very popular, he used to like to play golf, he liked sports, he liked to read, he enjoyed company, having a chat with all the lads and all the rest of it. He was just a really straightforward chap that we know plenty of people like that. He was one of those people and devoted to his family. On the 17th of November 1997, on a lonely road just outside Aberdeen, just to the north of the city, Roy Greig's body was found in a burning car. At the time, of course this was 1997, remember 3 years before Hollie had given all the information about the abusers, no one really knew what had happened. Anne said the family couldn't understand. He was he had no history of depression or mental problems or anything like that. He was a pleasant, well-liked person. He had no known financial problems, no health problems, no problems with relationships. He was just a straightforward, happy guy who enjoyed his life. Why would he be found on his own in a burnt-out car? The pathologist was a man called Dr. James Grieve, who I spoke to recently, who conducted the autopsy, and he decided that the autopsy should, and the cause leading to the cause of death, should be death by smoke inhalation. The other doctor who performed the autopsy was a lady doctor, Dawn Marie Chalmers, who I've now discovered is Dawn Marie Kelsey, and is practicing as a GP in Aberdeen. I have to say, since speaking to Dr. Grieve, I've also tried to speak to Dr. Kelsey, but she has disappeared. And even the people in the surgery in Old Aberdeen do not know what's happened to her. She's disappeared off the face of the earth. Once I wanted to talk to her. Very odd. We've also discovered today that Dr. Grieve is actually the Crown Office pathologist. And when we had we didn't know this at the time, but when I interviewed him, he got very nervous. And he said, near the end of it, he says, it sounds as if you're trying to implicate me with all this. And I said, with all what? He said, whatever you're talking about. And I said, well, we're not trying to implicate anybody. I said, we just want the truth. I said, if you acted honestly, then there's no problem. But I will tell you, Dr. Grieve, and you're an expert, but let me tell you this, because I've been doing a little research myself, although I know nothing about these things, but I have talked about people who do know what they're talking about. And one of the first things that they have said is that it's very, very, what we should say is it was described as an unexplained death, but probably suicide. That was how everybody was led to believe it was going to be. It was a suicide. I said, first of all, I said, I do understand that it's very rare for anyone to commit suicide by setting fire to themselves. It's too painful. Sometimes happens in political demonstrations, or people who've got a previous history of being very disturbed. But that didn't apply to Roy. You must accept it's very rare for people to kill themselves in that way. It is just so awful and painful and unpleasant, as I'm sure we can all imagine. And I said, so why would it be that you didn't advise an inquest on this? So Dr. Reeve again got very nervous and said, oh well, I just go on the facts, I didn't know about there's a motive for murder or anything like that. I said, well, even without the motive for murder, someone being found in a burning car is almost certainly indicative of arson, which is usually used to actually not only to cover up other crimes but to destroy evidence as well. But he couldn't answer. He said, oh well, I just made my decision on what I saw, and since then he had no contact with me whatsoever. Now, for many, we talk about the autopsy. We've only recently served the autopsy. For 9 years, Anne had been actually trying to get hold of the autopsy about her brother's death. And each time the Crown Office either ignored her requests. Now I think we can see why. We eventually got it, I applied for it, and they told me that they did have the autopsy, but it would be better if a doctor that they appointed would call us about it rather than send it to us and explain what the autopsy was all about, because we might not understand it, we might misunderstand what's in this autopsy. So one of our doctors will ring you and he'll explain it fully to you, exactly all the implications and what everything means, because you probably won't understand it. So at this point I said, well, look, send us the autopsy, we'd rather have it. If we don't understand it, we've got doctors we know who will explain it to us. So don't worry, just send us, and if we're not sure about anything, we'll find a doctor to explain it to us. Eventually they did send the autopsy. This was 3 weeks after they'd said they weren't going to conduct the investigation. It arrived on New Year's Eve 2009. In the autopsy, it's made clear that a good deal of alcohol was found in the stomach of Robert Greig. Despite Robert Greig being the bar manager, he was a very moderate drinker. He didn't drink a lot of alcohol at all. The alcohol that was found in his stomach was a brown liquid which was thought to be whiskey. Robert Greig, unlike most Scotsmen, hated whiskey. He never drank whiskey. As well as that, there was severe damage to Robert's skull. 2 ribs were broken and his sternum was broken. All the experts, they're acting informally at the moment. I would like a proper formal analysis of this, but and we've talked to a lot of people, believe that the most likely thing was that he was severely beaten, caused the injuries that occurred, had alcohol poured down his throat, and was then thrown into the burning car to die. We also believe that one of his rescuers, or so-called rescuers, was one of the murderers, because we discovered, Anne discovered, that the person who had allegedly rescued him and got a medal from the Royal Humane Society was known to Dennis Mackey. Now, where this all fits together is, if I take you to 2001. Now, I should explain, if you're not aware of this, if people who have Down syndrome don't necessarily link things together. But people like Hollie, she is a competent witness. She's been described as a competent witness, not only by the police themselves, but also by medical experts who've examined her at the time to make sure that whatever she said could be taken seriously. So, that being the case, Hollie there's no question about anything that she said. In fact, one of the experts actually said that Hollie does not know how to lie. In her consideration, she does not know how to lie. Also, people who suffer from Down syndrome have very vivid memories and long memories. And they remember things in great detail, far more so than people who don't suffer from that kind of affliction. And they also don't have the ability to fabricate or close things from their mind. So you can see already what terrible effect that must have had on poor Hollie, who couldn't even blank out these terrible rapes and ordeals that she'd suffered for 14 years. But obviously, could there be a better witness? I don't think it's difficult to find. I think it would be very difficult to find a more reliable witness than Hollie Greig. So this went on, and we worked very hard to try and sort out what is going on here. It's a very, very bad story. The Crown Office, just going back to the death of Roy Greig, in 2001, Hollie came forward with some more information to her mother that was previously unknown, that will explain everything that I've just told you. One day, she said, Mummy, she says, I have to tell you, she says, you know, she says, Uncle Roy, he found Daddy having sex with me. Anne said, what? Hollie said, yes, Mummy, yes, Mummy. He came in one day, he came to the house one day, And he came in and he found Daddy having sex with me. And Anne said, what happened then? What happened? Uncle Roy said to Daddy, don't you ever touch Hollie again. Don't you ever touch her. And Anne said, can you remember when this was? When did this happen? And through a process of elimination,